So now that you understand the background with the carbon cycle, where fossil fuels come into it, where humans come into it, the trends we've already seen in carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions, let's actually start talking about the impacts of climate change. And this video is going to talk about present day impacts. We're not going to talk about what might happen in the future. We're going to focus on what we are currently seeing. Now, this video is going to focus in specifically looking at the impacts to global temperature as well as weather events. So let's get started. The most potentially obvious impact we're seeing is increased surface temperature. This should make sense. If you have more greenhouse gases, you're going to have a stronger greenhouse effect. If you build more greenhouses in general, you're going to have more warming. This should be fairly obvious. We know carbon dioxide is increasing. We know carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, so therefore we expect it to be able to trap more heat. So let's take a look at this table. This table is looking at, for the past 140 years, so from 1880 to present day, if we took the average world temperature of each of those years and then ranked them from the hottest to the warmest, what we're looking at is the 10 warmest years on record. So here on the left is just the ranking, and then the second column is the year. And take a close look at these years. The most recent years are on this list: 2020, 2019, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, and 11 aren't on this list, and we have 10. And then we skip down to 2005, wasn't a normally warm year. But this is 150 or 140 years, and the most recent years, the years during your lifetime, are the warmest on record. This is telling us something. Now let's talk about what exactly this means, or how much warming has been happening. So the right two columns are anomaly in Celsius and Fahrenheit. So if we took the past 140 years from 1880 to present day, and we took the average temperature across that 140 years, whatever temperature that is, this anomaly column is looking at how much warmer that particular year was in comparison to the world average. Now, honestly, I don't remember the world average on top of my head, so let's just say from 1880 to 2020, it's 20 degrees Celsius. This is saying the year 2016 was 21 degrees Celsius. It was about 1 degree warmer than the average. Now, you might be like, wow, really? 1 degree warmer? Why is everyone getting so caught in a tizzy with this small degree of warming? Well, there's two reasons. One is that small temperature increases actually make huge impacts. We'll talk about those impacts in a little bit, but let me give you an idea. The last ice age, the entire northern hemisphere was covered in ice and in glaciers. Now, despite the whole northern hemisphere being covered in glaciers, the average world temperature was only about 5 degrees colder than it is today. 5 degrees! 5 degrees colder covered the Earth, or covered the northern part of our Earth, in ice. That was a small difference. 5 degrees, and that was 5 degrees Celsius. 5 degrees colder is glaciers. So what's 5 degrees warmer? What's 3 degrees warmer? What's 1 degree warmer? So small changes in global temperature can actually have huge impacts. And that's where we're going to go with this next slide. So one reason is that small temperature changes make huge impacts. The other reason why we care about this is that this number, this average temperature, this anomaly, is an average across the entire Earth. This does not mean all of Earth is warming at the same amount. What's actually happening is Earth is just doing all sorts of things. So, before I show you the map, sorry, I forgot I had this popping up. This, you may have noticed, does not have 2021 in it. When I'm making this video, in July 2021, so we don't know yet. But based on what we've been seeing so far, scientists think it's very likely that 2021 will be in the top 10. A little bit later in the year, we'll have better confirmation of that, but that's what they're thinking so far based on the months that we've already had. So, okay, sorry. Now let's jump back to this average temperature thing. So 1 degree Celsius higher than the average. Cool. But this is not across the world. Our world is cooling and warming at different rates. There's different things happening and it changes daily. So this map is kind of giving you an idea of how much variation exists in Earth's temperature. So what we're looking at is May 2021 and the average May day. And it's comparing it to like the past 30 years. This scale is saying, hey, this area of the Earth, if it's really, really blue, is much colder than the typical May. And this really, really red is saying, hey, this area of the Earth is much warmer than a typical May. Now, depending on how much you've been following the news during this time period, may have heard that the Arctic Circle had reached record highs, 90 degrees Celsius. So really freaking warm, especially for the Arctic Circle, which is typically in ice. And we're seeing that. So here in Russia, in northern Russia, we're seeing 5 degrees Celsius warmer than usual, which you're looking about 8 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit. This is a huge, huge difference. But you notice, despite having this strong red, we also have pockets of blue. Some areas were experiencing colder than average Mays. But here's the thing about averages. If we average everything that is happening in this map, it's getting warmer. Even the map, if you wanted to go back a couple months and take a look at what was happening in the south of the United States, particularly looking at Texas, some of the coldest temperatures ever. But other parts of the world were having extreme warming. So we're having a lot of variability in our atmosphere, a lot more than we've had in the past. We're having extreme highs and extreme lows, but the average of Earth's temperature is still increasing. If you're interested, if you go look at NOAA temperature, which is a US government organization, go take a look at some of their graphs from different months. It's kind of cool seeing the weather events we hear about around the world and how other places are experiencing almost the opposite of that. All right. So if you start messing with temperature, you're going to start seeing differences in precipitation. And this is because warm air can hold more moisture, so you have more evaporation. So warm air is going to literally suck water, out of lakes and streams, but also out of soil. And colder air is a lot drier and it releases that moisture. And so you have areas of warming and areas of cooling. So you're going to have areas of evaporation and areas of precipitation. And so this is happening, although I'm focusing here on the United States, this is happening worldwide. So again, taking a look at May 2021, this is comparing precipitation as compared to previous Mays. You have this green, blue, teal color as representing the record wettest, so having more precipitation than they've ever had before, or very tan colors as record driest, having no precipitation, or sorry, I should say, a lot less precipitation than in the past. And we can see that in May, sure, some areas were like, this is typical. But we have other areas that are having the most amount of rain they've ever seen or the most amount of drought they've ever had. And this is kind of worrisome because think about how dependent agriculture is on precipitation. Yes, we worry about drought, but we also have to worry about too much water. We can kill plants by literally drowning them. No, it doesn't have to be flooded for plants to die. They can just be oversaturated. At least with a drought, sometimes it's easier for us to water the plants, but when we're having way too much precipitation, you don't get to really dry out your plants. So this is going to really impact agricultural regions in both directions. This is also going to impact human infrastructure. Having too much rain, you're talking about downed trees, thinking about flooded roads, flooded homes, or too dry, and you're looking at water shortages. So not only is it impacting humans directly, thinking about our infrastructure, but also thinking about our food source. This map is not unique. We are seeing changes in precipitation like this all around the world. Also important for us because we here in the United States, we rely a lot on imported food. So it's not just about how our farmers are doing, it's about how our world's farmers are doing. And likewise, we provide a lot of food for other countries. So impacts to agriculture worldwide affects food worldwide. One last thing about weather type things is thinking very specifically about hurricanes. There's a lot of big storms, but hurricanes so far seem to be the most impacted by climate change. And this is because hurricanes, which form in our Atlantic Ocean, hurricanes are specifically fueled by warm water. This is why we really only see hurricanes in the summer and early fall seasons, is because they really need warm water to get them started. Well, if you're going to have warmer average global temperatures, you're going to have warmer global average ocean temperatures. And so warmer waters is going to help stimulate and create more hurricanes and more dangerous or severe hurricanes. Here's two pictures of probably the worst hurricanes in our region for the past 2 years. So Hurricane Laura and Hurricane Dorian. Intense, crazy intense hurricanes. This past 2020 hurricane season, I have a lot of records here. You do not need to write them down. But I just want to give you the idea of what I mean by more and more severe. So we broke tons of hurricane records, which is kind of unfortunate. You're like, oh, cool, we're breaking records. Yeah, these are not records we particularly want to break. So we had 12 hurricane landfalls in the United States. The previous record was 9, so more frequent hurricanes. In the month of September alone, this rates as the most storms we've had in a month, and it was 10. Now, by storms, this is referring to both tropical storms and hurricanes. There was 3 storms formed in a single day. That ties a previous record. There was 2 huge hurricanes in November. November is at the very tail end of the hurricane season, right? We're going into winter. It's starting to get cooler. And we had 2 hurricanes and large damaging hurricanes. This is the 5th year in a row that we've had at least one Category 5 hurricane. Category 5 is the strongest hurricane on our scale. And then the most storms in general, so hurricanes plus tropical storms and tropical depressions at 30, previous record being 28. And this is going to continue. These records are going to continue being beat every single year. And this is, detrimental, not just to the United States, but thinking about a lot of our Caribbean islands are incredibly impacted by these hurricanes as well. Infrastructure is impacted. Human lives are impacted. And if you're like, I don't care about any of those, human economies are impacted. Last year, we spent tens of billions of dollars in addressing these storms and the storm surge and the storm atrocities that happened. So our economy is impacted by this as well. Other types of storms, nor'easters, typhoons, monsoons, while might be impacted, just really aren't as much just because hurricanes have this close tie to warmer temperatures, particularly ocean temperatures. So now that we focus kind of the impacts to climate and to even local weather, we're going to talk about something tangential, thinking about organisms. So we've talked about how humans are impacted, how agriculture, how infrastructure is impacted. But, don't know if you guys know this, but humans are not the only things that live on Earth. There are other organisms that are impacted as well. And those impacts can kind of impact humans as well. So we'll still tie it back to humans. So let's think about insects. Insects need warm temperatures. This is why we don't have mosquitoes in the wintertime. This is why we don't have, wasp problems and yellow jacket problems in the wintertime. They need warm temperatures. Cool. If we keep having warm temperatures, we're going to have more insects. Some insects are fine, others not so much. So think about mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are referred to as the deadliest animal, not because mosquitoes themselves kill, but because they are vectors for disease, vectors for malaria and Zika virus and West Nile virus. They pass a lot of stuff around. Well, if you just extended their breeding season, their alive season, the potential for them to carry disease literally exponentially grows. If they're able to reproduce one more time, think about them doubling their population. This is not only not so great for literally human health, but also think about the impact that mosquitoes, or not really mosquitoes, but insects have in general on our agriculture. You might be like, well, if it's warmer, that means agriculture has a longer season as well. Yeah, but being able to grow maybe another round of crops is not going to, I'm trying to think of the best way to word this. Growing another round of crops gets us more food. Totally true. Stink bugs, potato beetles, reproducing one more time exponentially grows their population. So while, yeah, we'll get more food, barely, because the pest population is going to grow a lot more than our food does, which means we're going to have more pests to food and likely just going to end up with a lot more damage, and honestly, at the end of the day, probably make the same amount of food, maybe even less, because now we're battling a lot more pests than we would have otherwise. So the insects emerging earlier, not so great for human health or human agriculture. But it's not just about humans. So here we have a picture of a moose. Moose are found in much colder regions. And what we're finding, I'm going to use the moose as an example, but they are not the only ones. Moose populations are declining. We're seeing a lot more deaths of them. And at first we weren't quite sure why, but upon closer inspection of moose carcasses, wildlife rangers were noticing that they're covered in thousands of ticks. Ticks also, they're not technically an insect, but similar to insects, they do kind of emerge a lot more in warmer temperature. Well, these areas where moose live, which are historically cold, are warming up. These insects are able to breed a lot more, emerge a lot earlier, and are impacting mammal populations, particularly when thinking about ticks, a lot more than usual. Now, we as humans might rely on moose meat, but it's also just an indicator to us like, something's happening. If moose can get covered in ticks, what about the implications for humans, for people that are hiking, for the spread of Lyme disease? So it's kind of an alert, like, hey, something's going on here. Finally, I'm going to use this cute little guy as an example. This is the American Pika. This is actually where this animal is the inspiration for the name Pikachu. Fun fact for you. So what's happening with the American Pika is it's getting pushed out of its habitat. And so that's what this bullet point is, species being pushed into other zones. I'm going to do a very brief sketch. So American Pikas live on mountaintops, particularly snow-covered mountaintops. They are best adapted for that kind of environment. Here's the problem though. So let's say this red line is representing the snow 20 years ago. And so they lived in the snow-capped part. All right, well, 10 years ago, we might have seen a little bit less. They still have habitat though, and so they're fine. But, another 5 years goes by and they're finding even less. Like there's just not as much snow anymore because our temperatures are increasing. Give it another 5 years and there's no more snow on this mountain. Wintertime, summertime, doesn't matter, anytime. No more snow on this mountain. This American Pika can't evolve fast enough to our changing climate. They might be like, well, why doesn't it just run to a nearby mountain? Great question. I'm going to tell you right now what's happening on this mountain, also happening to the mountains next to it. So they don't even have a chance to relocate at all. The American Pika is actually currently on the waiting list to be listed as an endangered species because of habitat loss. And the habitat loss isn't humans deforesting it, which is kind of a human thing. It's not because of pollution directly, like water pollution. It's because of climate change. Because of climate change, they're losing their habitat. Now, this was just an example. Polar bears are like the classic example, but I wanted to show you just a different one. Again, you might not care, but maybe you can tie it to humans. So maybe, I'm telling you, maybe humans eat the American pika. We don't. But with a lot of these organisms, there is a connection back to humans. Maybe not directly, but remember when we talked about food webs and how they provide great tools so we can see if we lose one organism, how that ecosystem responds and what impacts that one removal has. So the American pika may not be directly important to us, but we might start learning, oh, wow, that was actually a really important food source for this, which helps this, which does this. So these could have much larger impacts, and we don't know yet. We're going to find out, though, unfortunately. So this was just a couple of the impacts of climate change, really focusing on how this increased greenhouse gases is going to increase our surface temperature. It's not even around the world. And it's actually why we use the term climate change. Because some people hear global warming and they'll be like, the earth, it's warming, which is true. But then you'll get people who are like, oh, well, it's so much colder here than it has been. Global warming's not happening. So that's why we use the term climate change a lot more now. You can use either one, but just know that's kind of why you're hearing me say climate change a lot. These changes in temperature and weather have wide-reaching impacts, not just to humans, but our natural environment. And unfortunately, a lot of species cannot evolve fast enough to be best adapted for our changing world. Some species are. Species that reproduce quickly, like insects. They're probably going to handle climate change just fine. But other things like elephants, giraffes, the American pika, as well as other organisms that take a longer reproduction, they're not going to be able to respond fast enough.